it occurred to me through interacting with people in one-on-ones that came in through this channel, and various comments that I've received over the time that I have been posting on this channel, that I haven't actually shared publicly much about. I don't know, just like a general overview of kind of like my awakening story, what that looks like. And I feel like that could actually be beneficial for people. Stories give us a way to connect. Oh my gosh, there's this little green caterpillar climbing, or a little inchworm climbing up the rock, and it is so cute. Hello. Oh, you look like you're having such a nice day. But yeah, you know, over the time that I've been posting to this channel, I have kind of on and off described pieces of, you know, just like the overall arc of my journey and what that's looked like. But I realized that a lot of what I've posted has just been the processing of it, more so than the actual circumstances. And it's easier now to kind of look back in retrospect at the arc and the pieces of what I've experienced that really played a pivotal role that I just didn't fully understand at the time. And so I want to share that. Maybe something a little bit more personal. I guess where I'll start is, you know, I had an initial opening, I guess you can call it that, when I was a teenager. And at the time I would not have said it this way, because it didn't feel spiritual. Yeah, I don't know how I would have described it at the time, but looking back, this was really the start of something, the start of a seeking. And it happened when I was probably 17. Ooh, look how pretty this leaf is that was in the water. Isn't that beautiful? Like a red. So when I was a teenager, when I was in high school, you know, there was a series of events that happened when I was in high school around family health crises and around just like personal crises. You know, in quick succession, within the span of, you know, a year and a half or 2 years, I, you know, had an abortion at a young age. There was health crises in my family, you know, on and off with my mother, and, you know, ongoing health issues with her. And then with my older sister, had a life-threatening illness that was just like, it was very traumatic. And then she went into remission, and, you know, a health crisis with my dad. So just like boom, 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 boom. And it was all around like mortality. And I didn't realize it at the time, but that shook something very deep in my system. And I remember during that time going to school, and just something changed in me. I couldn't relate anymore to the stories. And I wouldn't have said it this way at the time, because I didn't have the language for it. I didn't have the understanding. But now looking back, I couldn't engage with the stories of ego anymore. I saw them very clearly. I saw the drama for what it was. I saw the ego-made, the self-made suffering for what it was, in others at least. And so I couldn't engage in like the human world in the way that I had learned to leading up to that point. Just something kind of got shook. I wouldn't say it snapped, but something shook in me. And those years started a seeking, a really strong seeking energy. And initially that seeking was outward facing. It was seeking satisfaction, seeking success, seeking relationship, seeking validation, seeking money, seeking health, seeking in every way that I could think to seek. And it was very intellectualized at that point. But looking back, what the theme that I see was the seeking itself. It was, and I didn't recognize this at the time, but now in retrospect, I can see that all of that seeking was a seeking for some sort of fulfillment. Something had cracked, and I couldn't engage in the ways that I was watching other humans engage. And so it was really a spiral. It was a downward spiral in my life. And I had really severe depression, suicidality, really intense anxiety, panic attacks, all the things. It was just, there was so much suffering in my experience because something just felt fundamentally broken and fundamentally wrong in the experience, and I couldn't understand why, but there was a seeking, just such a strong, intense seeking for how do I end this? How do I rectify what I couldn't put a name to but could feel at a really deep level? And so that is what started my seeking. And it didn't have a spiritual flavor for many, many years. And it wasn't until probably a decade later, in my late 20s. I'm in my late 30s now, but it wasn't until a decade after that point in my late 20s where that seeking, the energy of that outward seeking did a U-turn and started getting pointed back internally. And initially that was self-improvement focused. Well, if none of this stuff in the external world will ease this yearning that I feel, that I couldn't describe, that I couldn't explain, maybe if I fix myself, if I heal myself, if I improve myself, if I figure myself out, maybe that'll do it. And so even at that point, there was no understanding of spirituality. I had never heard the word enlightenment. I didn't know what that was, but there was still just such an intense seeking. And really at the heart of that, all of that seeking was also a really deep and earnest curiosity about the world and what was going on here and just the way that things are, and just really wanting to get to the heart of it. And, during that time, during those 10 years of the seeking being very external, I, went to a very prestigious engineering school. I got a degree in mechanical engineering. I was very intellectual. I was very much in living here, of trying to understand, trying to know stuff as a way to quell that yearning, trying to know, trying to understand what was going on, that if I could just gain enough concepts, if I could just really grasp enough concepts, then that would quell that yearning that I felt. And obviously that didn't work. But so there was that, and then I went into, kind of working in the business world, but my path after college was very, even at that point, very unconventional. Even though I kind of did the business thing, the 9-to-5 thing, it was in a very unconventional way. So I started challenging conventions and the ways that I was conditioned to be, even, in my late teens, early 20s. So I went into working in the business world, in tech, in Austin, Texas, where I was living at the time, working for startups, working for really small stage companies who were really just building something from the ground up. So there was a lot of risk involved in the path that I took. There was a lot of challenge and a lot of stretching of the conventions that I knew. And at that point, I really, there came a point maybe in my mid-20s where, something shook again. I woke up one day and I looked around at my life. I don't know what precipitated this, but I looked around at my life and something like flipped. And I just knew there's got to be another way. There's got to be another way to do life. This isn't it. This isn't what I'm looking for. I think I really let the suffering in for the first time, the dissatisfaction in, really for the first time. And that day, it was such a clear day, that's when the seeking did a U-turn and started getting pointed inward. And I started questioning, even before this took a quote-unquote spiritual turn, I started self-inquiry. I didn't know at the time that that's what it was, but I started questioning everything that I did and why I did it. And that started at a very surface level. Like, why do I feel pressure to have a certain kind of a job or a certain kind of a career? Why do I eat the things that I eat? Why, just like literally every social convention, do I actually want to get married? Why do I want a monogamous relationship? Is that true, or is that just what I've been told that I should want? Why, as a woman, why do I use makeup? Is it because I want to? There's a genuine desire, or because that's what somebody else has told me? And at this point, there was still a really deep identification. There was a me that was making the choices and doing the things, but I started questioning everything. Like, why do I shave? Why do I shave my armpits? Why do I shave my legs? Is there some benefit? Is it really bringing me fulfillment, or is it a social pressure? Is it a way that I'm told that I should be, that I should behave, that I should show up? Is it really, I started really questioning, like, is this authentic? Like, every part of my life, is this really authentic? Or did I adopt this? Because society or someone either overtly or subtly made me believe that it's what I should do. And so there was a self-inquiry that started in my mid to late 20s. And it was ferocious. It was ferocious. And it touched everything. And then that naturally led into going to therapy at some point and really questioning my ways of being, my ways of relating, the habits that I had built, the coping mechanisms, at a very surface level. I hadn't really gotten into the deeper the deeper realms of true spiritual inquiry yet. But that's where it started. And then there was a point in my late 20s, maybe like 31. I can't remember exactly how old I was, but there was another year. So all of my big openings came on the heels of life getting flipped inside out in some way. Every single one. It had nothing to do with anything that I did. So I think that's a very important thing to mention. But there was another point, maybe like 2017 or 2018, something like that, where there was just a series of events in my life. There was a relationship that kind of fell apart, and there was a lot of drama in that, and an infidelity. And the business that I was helping to build was undergoing like a big shift, and there was a lot of uncertainty in this business that I had helped build, and I had put so much of my heart, so much of my energy into this business, and was really seeing the behind the scenes interworkings of the tech industry and the startup industry, and realizing that, just questioning what has any of this been for? What has all my work been for? I had put so much of my identity into my career, into this identity as a tech person, and I was watching it crumble and had a huge identity crisis. Really, that's the heart of what this series of events was. There was a huge identity crisis brought on by a fierce grace that life put in front of me. So my work was falling apart. There was health crises in my family again. My older sister was having health issues again. And then this same year, one of my cousins very suddenly and very tragically died. And so it was like within a span of 8 months, just boom, 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 boom. And just life got flipped inside out again. And that's when the internal investigation really was lit on fire. And it was around the end of that year that the Tao Te Ching came into my life for the first time. That's when things kind of took a spiritual turn. Up until that point, none of this felt spiritual. None of this was spiritual. I had no interest in spirituality, although I was always very intrigued by mysticism and contemplatives and things like that, though it wasn't anything, there wasn't an intensity in it until that point. And then I found the Tao Te Ching. I was so captivated by it. I didn't understand anything that it was saying, but I could feel the truth in it, and it was piercing. It was so piercing. And then it was around that same time that I met Henry. Henry came into my life. And immediately when I met him, there was a recognition that he had touched something. And whatever that was, I didn't know what it was. My mind was trying to intellectualize it, but whatever that was, I knew in my bones that it's what I had been looking for. And so I just it was like a magnet with him for that reason. And at that point too, after he and I met, we started traveling. That was when COVID happened. The world got flipped inside out again. And he and I bought a travel trailer and we're going to travel. And the day before, literally the day before that we were set to start on our adventures, I got laid off from my tech job. And it was another upheaval. And it was life starting to wipe the slate clean and to take away my identity as a business person, as a tech person. And my identity had already started falling apart in retrospect. It had already started crumbling, but I didn't really recognize it at that time. And during that time of traveling is when shamanism came into my life. And initially when that came into my life, I won't like tell all the stories about it, but psychedelic shamanism came into my life. And it wasn't something I was looking for. And initially there was trying to form a new identity around it. There was such a strong, because I was in such a crisis. I didn't know who I was, so there was a way that I was really trying to form this new identity around it being a healer and a shaman. And but when I look back, shamanism has really been, once that investigation was really put on fire and the self-inquiry really started happening in a really deep and profound way, and a way where the fundamentals of identity were being challenged and were really crumbling, shamanism was the vehicle in a way that I could have never anticipated. Because by the nature of shamanism, it challenged at every turn the grace that it brought, the experiences that it brought, the circumstances that it brought, challenged every way that I knew myself, every way that I was holding on to some way of being, some concretized, this is what I am. It pushed every edge. And it was like a grinder, it was like sandpaper. Like a grinder grinding it down. I had a lot of notions initially about what shamanism was, what I believed it was, and a lot of those, were kind of in line with typical Western ideals of shamanism. And in the West, we tend to see shamanism as, some mystical thing where the shaman visits the underworld and talks to entities and spirits and is a healer. And there's a big identity wrapped up in that. So the way that the West looks at shamanism and the way that I see a lot of people engaging with shamanism is from a very ego-centered place, from a very self-centered place. But the further that I got into this, and the more that my engagement with shamanism pushed the boundaries and was just huge parts of identity were just dropping. I realized that shamanism was actually a death process for me. Shamanism was the death of Jennifer. It was the death of identity, the death of the separate self. And I heard the term hollow bone early on in my kind of engagement with shamanism, and that phrase just was captivating to me. Like I just was so enlivened by that. What does it mean to be hollow? And the idea of a hollow bone is being an empty vessel as a shaman, like totally empty, through which, call it spirit, operates. And I was so captivated by that notion, by that idea of like, what does it mean to be empty? And shamanism, and specifically starting to facilitate psychedelic ceremonies for other people, gave me an experiential understanding of what it meant to be empty. And I will never say that you need to be a shaman to understand this, but for me, this is how this showed up, was facilitating psychedelic ceremonies was the first time that I experientially felt. I remember that I was in a ceremony and playing an instrument and singing. And I specifically remember looking at my arm and just watching it moving as it was, shaking like a shakapa, and realizing, I'm not doing this. I'm not moving this arm. The moving is just happening. There was an experiential understanding that there wasn't somebody there, even though I didn't quite have the words for that yet, that there wasn't somebody there doing the moving, doing the singing. The singing was just happening. It was more like being sung, more than being the doer that was doing the singing. So I started feeling that experientially, and it shifted something in me. So the ways that I hear shamanism talked about, and I got this from, one of Jed McKenna's books. He talks about how we look at enlightenment and awakening as though it's a place that we visit from here. Here being like the ego self, the engagement in the human world. But there's a point where this flips, where this, being like the human world, becomes a place that you visit from that empty center, from that beingness, from the truth of essentially what you are. That there's a flip-flop. And had a turning point with shamanism, that I realized that so many of the ways that I heard people talking about shamanism, especially practitioners of it, was that like ceremony and the way of being in ceremony was a place that that a shaman visits from the ordinary state of consciousness, that unordinary state is a place that's visited. And something in me shifted, and I realized that there was an opportunity for that unordinary state to become the abiding place that was lived from, rather than a place that was visited. And that's when things really shifted, and shamanism really there was just such an emptying, but there was also a fierce earnestness in me. The very first ayahuasca ceremony that I ever sat in, there was something in me. It wasn't there to heal something or to fix something or to make myself better. There was just this intention that was like lit on fire that just came out of me, that I want to know what's true. I want to know what's true. And that has informed my relationship with those medicines. And I've come to understand and to know that they're not separate from what you are. We externalize them as something other. And there's lots of traps in it, just like with meditation. Meditation can be used as a tool to pierce identity, or it can be used just to make your life better and a little less stressful. Plant medicines can be used to pierce identity, or they can be used to turn yourself into a better self, if that's what you want. It's all dependent on the context. And that's what I've learned. But facilitating, and just really psychedelics in general, I've talked to friends who have used psychedelics. Psychedelics, if there's an earnestness and a willingness to see your own emptiness, they're a touchstone for the truth. But there's a lot of fireworks that the mind can get wrapped up in, and a lot of meaning making. And what happens with psychedelics is that in psychedelic ceremonies, big pieces of identity get cracked open, and then the identity and the ego structure and the self structure goes into this frantic mode of trying to maintain itself, so it finds a new identity, a new way of being to glove onto. And a very common one is for people to come out and be like, I want to be a shaman, I want to be a healer, I'm supposed to heal, I'm supposed to do this. So it tries to immediately reform itself when there's a crack somewhere else. But the piercing, the way that it can be used to pierce, is what if there's nothing new formed? What if it's just the emptying, and there's just an allowing of the emptying without grabbing something new to try to create a concrete self? And I don't want any of this to come across as like, you need psychedelics to wake up, or you need to be a shaman to wake up. Like, I don't encourage that at all. I actually feel that that would be really irresponsible. It would be deeply irresponsible. I share this more just because every awakening journey is so unique and so different. And meditation isn't the only path. I've done periods of meditation for sure. You know, being out on my property and finding myself alone here and being really deeply confronted with my own emptiness. There were periods of meditation in that, and that in a way was its own meditation. It was a living meditation, a forced meditation, a forced sitting still. And so after I bought this property in West Virginia, life did another upheaval, and I ended up here alone. And it shook something so deep in me. It was, buying this place, and shamanism in general was just starting to follow the movement of truth, even though it challenged everything in me. I was devastated when life started like really putting shamanism in my world in a really big way. I was devastated because I didn't want to be that. I didn't want to be like a spiritual woo-woo person. I didn't want to. There was something in me that knew what it would cost me, what it would cost my life. It cost me everything that I knew, every way that I knew myself. And even to this point, shamanism and facilitating continues to be an immense teacher, because now it's teaching me to embody the the emptiness that I've come to see that I am. Like that self sense, the belief in the illusion of self has dropped. And now there's an embodiment of that I'm being taught experientially in a perfect way. It's teaching me to hold bigger and bigger energies and remain as the stillness in that. It's stretching the capacity of the body and the nervous system to remain as that stillness in the face of bigger and bigger challenge and bigger movements of energy and life. And it's perfect. Like it's such the design of it is so perfect. It's so stunning to me. I couldn't have anticipated it. I couldn't have created it. And now there's this outward movement of, having built this place and now inviting others here to share the magic of this land with people, because it has been so sacred and so central to my process, to the falseness dropping, the self-sense being seen through. It's been immense. Something else I want to touch on too in my story. This is a little like out of chronology, but it feels important to say that, just in general, my background and my upbringing and just my conditioning. I don't know if it was being a woman in the world, being conditioned as a woman, or, probably a variety of different things, the way that my parents engaged with us, and just and not to say that it was bad at all. It wasn't. It was just everybody, really doing their best. But there was something in me that never really formed like a strong sense of self in a way. There was very unconscious ways that it was very strong. But there was just this like chameleoning, of like being whatever other people wanted me to be or needed me to be or expected me to be. And so it was very fluid. The sense of self was just like this constantly morphing thing. And, there was always this like, it just felt like a flail inside of like trying to figure out who I was, because it never felt solid. There was something in me that always knew that it wasn't solid. But I needed to know that for myself through trying my best to hold a solid identity, to find something solid that I could be, that like I am this. But nothing really ever felt like it fit. It all just felt so ill-fitting. And so I feel that that's a big part of what drove my life, and what drove this inquiry. And this just like earnest need to know, who am I? Like, who the hell am I? That question drove everything. But I didn't really know it. I couldn't have said that. I didn't recognize that for a really long time. And I didn't do anything. It was just life. Life did it. The circumstances and the events did it. I didn't do it. I couldn't even give up. I couldn't let go. I couldn't surrender. Like that recognition that there wasn't a solid self, that happened on the heels of another time of life just flipping inside out, of my relationship with Henry ending, and him being the touchstone for truth in my life. And then suddenly he was gone. And I had been externalizing that. Suddenly he was gone. And I was here alone. And I had to learn to stand in truth without relying on anything else. I had to learn to stand up. Because there had been a deep truth established in me before then and in my relationship with him, but I was still externalizing it. Like I needed something external to be able to stand in it. And then life took that away. And that was kind of the final card in the house of cards, and then the house toppled. The house of cards toppled. The house of Jennifer, the self-sense, crumbled because enough had been stripped away, enough had been seen through. And then I realized that Jennifer never actually existed. It was just an idea. It was just a belief. It's just ignorance, confusion, with no reality. And since then, there's been a learning to stand in that. Oh, there's a hummingbird right there. Beautiful. The hummingbirds love these. I don't know if you can see these behind me, these orange flowers. It's called jewelweed. Like, the hummingbirds love them so much. So now it's been learning to stand in that emptiness, in that knowing. And it's dropping. It's dropping and permeating the entire way of being. And there's still, illumination still happens. There's still like, oh, look at this way that there was a habit built of a belief in self through this habit. And then those habits are seen through. Like the belief overall goes away, but then there's these habits that the body still acts out that were developed. Are you a crawdad? Pinching my toe. I have my feet in the spring branch right now. I get little toe pinches from time to time. It's really cute. But the habits that the body had built up, the habit of being a self, like plays out in so many ways. So then that habit gets seen in every way that it's playing out. So those habits are still illuminated. You know, there's moments of like, oh, here's another way that habit of being a self is playing itself out. And then I see through it, and it settles into the system deeper. I'm sure there's so much more that I could say about this. This video is getting pretty long. I'm sure there's so much more that I could say about my story and the things that contributed. You know, my dog Bailey, who passed away earlier this year, was huge. She was such an immense teacher. She was my teacher of presence. And she modeled real presence to me. She modeled Buddha nature. And, you know, I said a prayer in the couple years before she died that I wanted to see her clearly as she was, not as Jennifer saw her. I wanted to see her as she was. Yeah, there's so many other things that I could say about it. But I needed this. I see now that this realization required that everything in my life fall apart. I had to lose everything. I had to lose everything that I thought I was, everything that I was holding on to. Every way of knowing the world, every way that I knew to orient either to myself or to the world, like, had to be ripped away. I was required. And so after that realization of no self, there's coming to live the truth, like feeling the movement of truth inside. And it's like a magnet. There's either like this invisible force that like pulls towards something or towards an experience or in a direction, or a repulsion. And it's at a really deep level. It's like a gut level that moves everything. There's no longer, the mind doesn't get involved in action anymore. It's completely the body. It's completely listening to the body. And that, the way that knows truth is silent. The body communicates in silence. The body deeply knows silence. So the entire way of being shifted from thinking and concepts and knowledge and intellectualizing and philosophy and theology, or, you know, all these other things, and logic and considering things, like all of that went away. The mind got quiet. And the body started leading. And so there's this process of, and it's still ongoing, of a relearning, a complete relearning of how to be in the world, of telling the truth, of like paying attention to those subtle body signals where there's like a tension or a suffering that arises in experience, and tends to be a ping or a trigger that there's a truth that's not being listened to. So it's a completely new way of being in the world. Letting go of being understood, letting go of being seen, letting go of ever being known. And there's such a deep aloneness in it. Complete aloneness, even in the midst of being surrounded by people. It's completely alone. And there's a letting go of trying to help anyone. You know, even in my role, my character that I play as a psychedelic facilitator, there's no longer a trying to help anyone. It's like coming to live as presence. And presence doesn't push or pull at anything. It doesn't try to change anything. It allows everything. So shamanism continues to be a teacher for me of how to embody that. And so it's a very unique path. I went from a path of intellect and engineering and being very smart, to the body leading everything, and the mind no longer having any involvement. I can't even really intellectualize things anymore. I get comments sometimes that ask me to explain something, or I got a comment recently that asked me about, you know, like physics and maybe the role of like quantum physics and all of this, or kind of that as an entry point. And I feel like that is a valid entry point for a lot of people. And, you know, there was a time where I would have loved to talk about stuff like that, but those types of things don't even occur to me anymore. Concepts don't occur to me. Trying to understand this doesn't occur to me. There's no longer a need for knowledge. If something needs to be known, then it comes. There's not a need to try to recollect things or understand them or to retain them. It happens on its own. me just sit for a moment and see if there's any last minute things that want to be shared. I suppose one important thing that I'll say is that this process has been one of letting go, of letting in that there's nobody here in control, that there is no control to be had. And so much of this stuff sounds so paradoxical, I know that. I know that it's paradoxical because the mind operates in this and that. So it tries to hold to this and then says, wait, but if it's this, and then that contradicts this, and so which is it? In this understanding, this realization transcends that, it's beyond that. So it can't be grasped by the mind, it can't be turned into a concept, it can't be understood, it can't be known, it can't be controlled. It can only be lived. That's the truth, it can only be lived. That's the knowing of it. The living of it is the knowing of it. The living of it is the realizing of it. And if you have questions about anything, like I'm happy to answer questions. Like maybe at some point I'll start doing a little like Q&A on my channel. If you like submit comments as questions, maybe I'll start doing some videos to answer questions about things, or if you're curious about any other part of my story or what this process has looked like, or you know, there was also a point in this process where I really needed a lot of support. Like it kind of happened side by side with learning to stand alone, but there was a humility that came online where I had to let go of the mask of having it all together and having it all figured out and being put together, and just letting in the messiness and letting the messiness really shine, and making a lot of mistakes and fumbling and tripping a lot. And having one-on-one support was really vital during that time. You know, both in sitting in ceremonies, in psychedelic ceremonies with other people, and being messy and flawed and human, and getting comfortable in that. And also, you know, sessions with the therapist, or, you know, sessions with spiritual teachers one-on-one. So I've engaged in all of that sort of stuff. And there's really been a place for that in my experience. And so I guess all that to say is, like, if it feels right to you, if there's something curious in you, I do work with people one-on-one. I do offer one-on-one sessions. That's not to say that you should do that, or that I'm the right person for that for you. But yeah, if that's of interest, hit me up. There's links in the description, etc. I'm also starting to open up my space for one-on-one visits. It's like a spiritual sanctuary, a shamanic sanctuary that's devoted to self-inquiry. It's in a very beautiful remote forest setting, so there's gonna be a video on that coming before too long that kind of showcases the space and such. And so I am starting to open the space up for that. So if that's something that you feel drawn to, you can visit the website or reach out directly. So, because this space is really magic, and it has been an essential part of my investigation, and really forcing me to sit still. Nature is such a beautiful mirror in that way. I'm going to show you these pretty little purpley flowers, and then I'll wrap up. Oh, holy moly. Ooh, I've been sitting on that rock right on my tailbone for a while, and whoa, getting up is quite the experience. Wow. Making my body sing. I believe that this guy is, I don't think it's Indian tobacco, but it is a type of lobelia. It's so beautiful. I love those little purpley flowers. Be well.